I've done a lot of work on 432 hertz tuning. In my book, you'll see a whole chapter on 432 hertz and how it entrains us better to a heart-brain consciousness. And then I went as far as developing, because even if you just switch your keyboard to 432 hertz, that doesn't really do it fully. What I found is geometrically, there's something called, we use this tuning standard called equal temperament. Equal temperament is like taking a cookie or salami cutter, right? And you cut each note into the square root of 2. So you're basically cutting each note mathematically into equal partitions of the square root of 2, right? The way it does work is that there are mathematical intervals that account for that. And those intervals are critically important. And I named that, and I took my work to that level, precise temperament tuning. So what it does is that it actually creates a truly geometric form of 432 hertz tuning, and anyone can download it. You know, I do a lot of work on Leonardo da Vinci's artwork. And I discovered that there was encryptions hidden. It's the subject of a television show I have on Gaia called Code X. And one of the things that I saw in that famous iconic illustration of Vitruvian Man, which is the man standing inside the circle and the square representing masculine and feminine. But most people don't know that there's a page number on the Vitruvian Man. And it's kind of conspicuous. First of all, Da Vinci writes in backwards mirrored text all the time. So he cut the Vitruvian Man and drew horizontal and vertical lines on his body. And no one really knows why, but if you read the text above it, which is in backwards mirrored text, also in backwards mirrored text, it says that the man is cut into 14 parts. And it mentions 1/14th in the text above the Vitruvian Man. Well, the 1/14th and the 14 cut reference is actually to Osiris. Osiris, who is the Egyptian god in the Egyptian pantheon, who was killed by his brother Set and cut into 14 parts. So immediately there's a symbolic reference to something that's related to Egypt. And he's got all these cuts. And what we discovered was that when you overlay the pyramid in the exact right positioning at the navel, which would be the ground level, then where he has each of these cuts on the Vitruvian Man's body tells us exactly where the chambers are inside the pyramid. Kind of fascinating, right? So it matches exactly the pyramid. And I went down a rabbit hole and found out that Da Vinci actually writes of this in his time in Egypt. So he spent 3 years in Egypt. He was missing from Italian history. He was very famous. Even in his youth, he was quite famous. There's no record of him in Italy from 1482 until 1486. The first piece of art that came out after that period of time in 1486 was the Vitruvian Man. Well, in the upper right-hand corner of the Vitruvian Man illustration is a page number, not written in backwards mirrored text. And we know when Da Vinci doesn't write in backwards mirrored text, usually it's encrypted. There was no book that this was a part of. This was a loose leaf illustration. So why would it have a page number on it? And the page number illustrated there is 126, 1.26. The doubling of the octave. Increasing the side of a cube by 1.26 doubles its octave. So what he was trying to tell us was about the coming new age where mankind doubles his octave into a higher dimension. And that 1.26 is not only true in mathematics, it's true in musical ratio. I was just recently asked by a very famous neuroscientist at UCI, University of California, Irvine. His name is Donald Hoffman. He's going to be on my podcast soon. I'm very excited about this. He's a super genius guy. He's probably the world's expert on mathematically mapping human consciousness. That's a concept. So he came in my office a few weeks ago. We spent the afternoon together and he said, Robert, can you tell me, think about how consciousness might actually have an equation for our emotions? So can you apply a mathematical equation to an emotion? And then he said, the other thing I want you to do, so nothing big, right? The other thing I want you to do is I want you to figure out how the universe spreads itself from the number 1 into all of its divisions, the many divisions of the number 1, like the Latin phrase omnia ab uno, many from 1, and then e pluribus unum, which we have on the dollar bill, which is, the opposite of that, 1 from the many, and then returns itself back to 1. So these are the 2 questions he gave me as a challenge. He's like, these are things, and he brought another famous mathematician with him named Chetan Salhotra, who's also a university professor. And they are heavily published, and they're actually asking me. They spent 4.5 hours in my office And they're like, look, we want to know what you think about this. I already understood that our brains at our, left temporal lobe and our right temporal lobe, that's exactly like right here, right on both sides of our head. And one side is the seat of music. So the right brain, which is the feminine side of the brain, is music, and that's where we process music right here, right? Not far from our ears. On the other side of the brain, so the left temporal lobe, it's where we process mathematics. So there's this concept of mirror neurons, right? And how people can mirror mimic. The same thing happens within our brain. And so you could say that the visual arts would be in the occipital lobe, in the back of our brain, on the right side. And then what we call the material sciences would be the representation of that manifested form, art imitating life. So then we have biology and chemistry and physics over here, right in the back of our brain. They're visual sciences rather than visual art, but actually they're the same thing, just looking at it from two different angles, because everything we understand in the visual material sciences first had its emanation as an idea on the other side. Plato's realm of form teaches us that as well. So I started thinking about this. Okay, well, can music create or be a catalyst for emotional response? And what do you think? When you listen to music, can it bring on different emotions for you? Well, then there must be a mathematical relationship, because mathematics is just a numerical form of music, and geometry is the sound that we experience with our eyes. And therefore, I could even argue that music is just the geometry that we experience with our ears. So then maybe what are the different waveforms of music that could cause us to feel different emotions, like joy, like happiness or sadness, or there's a villain entering? And so you look at movie sets, and we're here in LA area, so everyone here has studied some form or another of like how to set up studios and everything, something I've never studied. But one thing I do know is whenever a villain enters a movie, they always play a chord in the background. You know what the chord is? If you want to create fear in someone, you play a low frequency sound, right? And it's like agitating. It's like, ooh, what is this? It gives you this weird, eerie feeling, right? Well, the sound they play whenever villains enter or Darth Vader comes in, it's like dun, 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 dun. Well, that's diminished fifths. The diminished fifth is the relationship that always is associated with devilishness, and like the villain is coming in. So all the minor chords, which are generally, you have to use a lot of black keys for the minor chords on the piano keyboard. Generally, the minor chords bring what we would call negative emotions along with them. We can entrain people sympathetically to those resonances, and we can agitate fear-based states just by playing minor chords all the time. And by the same token, you can play the white keys on the piano keyboard and the right combinations of those and the major chords. And generally, those major chords are going to make you feel happy. They're going to raise your spirits and make you feel lighter. So then I started looking at the mathematics of what creates these chord relationships. And the mathematics is mathematical intervals. So 3/2 is the perfect fifth. And 3/2 giving you the perfect fifth is actually this beautiful feeling of stability. It makes you feel safe. It's a major chord, right? That'd be like C to G on a piano keyboard. But then when you get to, the diminished fifth is this very negative feeling. It makes you scared. It makes you feel like something's ominous. It's like foreboding in a negative way. But if you play the major third, you feel love. The major third is 1.26. That is the cube root of 2. That is the major third. That's the doubling of the cube. So we're now doubling our octave through the major third, which is the interval of music that creates a feeling and sensation of joy and love. And there it was, as one of the page numbers on a page illustrated that was never part of a book. And how does that then translate for you, without even realizing it, to go all the way to Delphi to turn it on? The new chord of the world being the major third, which brings a feeling of love. So there is a mathematical representation. Every one of our emotions can be entrained musically through mathematical interval that all of us can understand. So whenever I said, oh, well, geez, how could I come up with a mathematical relationship for emotions? That's very difficult to conceptualize. But as soon as you realize that math and music are the same thing, for me to say to you, can music bring on emotion? Oh, absolutely. Well, then that means that there's geometric relationships of that cube root of 2. That means that there's certain light forms and colors that in combination will bring greater joy, and certain light forms and colors, because light and sound are one, that will bring you this diminished fifth feeling or the minor second, or any of the minor chords that are going to bring you into a more negative state. So now you realize, wait, maybe even just with music and light and geometry around me, I can actually raise my vibration? And the answer is yes. I've done a lot of work on 432 hertz tuning. In my book, you'll see a whole chapter on 432 hertz and how it entrains us better to a heart-brain consciousness. And then I went as far as developing, because even if you just switch your keyboard to 432 hertz, that doesn't really do it fully. What I found is geometrically, there's something called, we use this tuning standard called equal temperament. Equal temperament is like taking a cookie or salami cutter, right? And you cut each note into the square root of 2. So you're basically cutting each note mathematically into equal partitions of the square root of 2, right? So basically, this is not necessarily how the universe works, right? The universe is like this snake, and the snake has its motion that's often related to Fibonacci, it's related to Euler number, it's related to something also called Lucas numbers. But basically, the way the snake is moving is not entirely uniform, right? It's not perfectly uniform. So when you actually break it down, you'll see that there are slight variations. It's not just like saying, okay, this is where the part of the snake's body is going to be at this particular section. It's always going to be like that. It doesn't work that way. The way it does work is that there are mathematical intervals that account for that. And those intervals are critically important. And I named that, and I took my work to that level, precise temperament tuning. So what it does is that it actually creates a truly geometric form of 432 hertz tuning. And anyone can download it. You can go, and there have been musicians that have been at the San Francisco Conservatory, as well as in Europe, that have now made websites where you can actually download this tuning to change the tuning of synthesizers, et cetera. Guitar makers are now making like tuning standards with this fret, which is a new fret. It's a slightly different fret. And you get a lot more texture in the music. So when you're listening, I was just listening to Mozart while I was in Salzburg a couple of weeks ago. And he did everything in 432 hertz tuning, and they used well-tempered tuning, which is similar to precise temperament tuning. So it's a different type of temperament. Not every note is exactly equally spaced. So there are textures and there are nuances that are different for this. Why is it that the world around us came up with this 440 hertz tuning, which clearly is not a geometric approach to music? Because if you look at the sum of angles of all geometric forms, and as I said, geometry is the sound that we experience with our eyes. So if you look at the sum of angles of all the geometric forms, they will always sum to 9 in numerology, without exception. So numerology would be another way of saying digital root math. So all you do is you take a number like 27. What would be the numerology of 27, or digital root of 27? Would be 9, because 2 plus 7 equals 9, right? So 45 would also be 9. Something like 16 would be 7, 1 plus 6. You just take whatever the number is and collapse it down into one digit. So it's like a cataloging system for numbers as well. This is all in my book as well. It teaches you a whole new way to see pattern in number, right? This is an important part of it. And so when you start looking at it in that sense, then you say, well, wait a minute, every geometric form comes out to the sum of angles that is the number 9, without exception. So we'll take a square. 360 degrees are the sum of angles of a square. 3 plus 6 plus 0 equals 9. After a square is what? A pentagon, 5 sides. The sum of angles of a pentagon is 540 degrees. 5 plus 4 plus 0 equals 9. Then after that, you would have a hexagon, so 6-sided object, right, in a polygon form. And you add the sum of its angles, it's 720. 7 plus 2 plus 0 equals 9. So you can literally take the translation of those geometric shapes, and you can apply it to music by just going straight crossover from sum of angles in degrees to hertz frequency. So what happens when I play on an instrument 360 hertz, right, which would be the sum of angles of the square? Well, that's an F sharp. Then the next one is 540, which is a pentagon. So if I play that 540 hertz on a piano, that's going to give me C sharp, right? Then the next one is going to be 720. 720 is an F sharp again, just in the next octave up, because it's just doubled the value, right? If I keep doing this with all the polygonal forms, guess what? It plays a perfect F sharp major chord in perfect 5-part harmony. So now we have a musical representation of visible objects, and it's a perfect match. And this isn't only true for polygons, it's true for all hyperdimensional and higher dimensional objects like dodecahedron, which is 6,480 hertz, or which is 6,480 degrees as its sum of angles. The sum of angles of an icosahedron is 3,600. So all these numbers, again, you'll notice they all sum to 9. So we take this same principle and apply it now to a tuning standard of precise temperament tuning. By this, when we listen to it, it sounds entirely different. It has little nuances that you don't hear otherwise. So the texture of it becomes more significant. The melancholy parts sound more melancholy and the joyous parts sound more joyous. It's beautiful because it's like experiencing life. But when I think about it, it's like, but why did, some evil group, was it the Nazis or was it somebody that was trying to do something to limit humanity from understanding its higher self? And the answer I'm going to give to you is that it was just us, because we chose it. You asking the question, why is it that I have to experience this negative waveforms of music? Who's doing this to me? And the answer I have to you is that, yes, technically, there would be people in your matrix, right, in your world, who would be wanting you not to ascend to higher levels of consciousness. Or you could look at it and say, but I'm the creator of all that is. So if I'm the creator of all that is, then I have to ask myself the question, not why did that happen to me? Because 90% plus of what happens to us didn't really just happen to us. It's what we believed happened to us. We start to then ask the question, why did I choose this? Maybe the whole reason for choosing it is just to experience and learn through it, and learn to accept and love it just as it is. So that's where I come back. It's not that there's, the archons and all the negative stuff that people are leaving, I'm being victimized because of this, I'm being victimized because of that. In this world, we often say the term believing or seeing is believing. We often hear that, right? Seeing is believing. I think I was 19 years old when I realized that statement was backwards. And therefore, everything operates on something in physics called Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, which says that what I get in this life is what I expected I was going to get. And that all of it was some choice by an invisible hand that might have just been my hand. So that we'll have that realization and come to the realization that we ourselves are divine.